Hey, what's up, y'all? Daquan here, and in this video, I want to show you some of the things I did as a beginner to get the chords and the harmony that you hear now. I want to lead with this though. If you think conventionally, you're going to get conventional results. All right. So keep that in mind when I tell you my approach. All right. So when I started learning, I didn't know a lot of the stuff that I played. My first scale was a blues scale, and I learned that from a Radio Shack keyboard by copying the notes. I didn't realize it was the blues scale until years later. One of the first things I learned was a song. Actually, my cousin taught me the song. It was No Scrubs. Uh, right. So if you listen to the song, it has a guitar sound, right? It was actually played by a keyboardist, and he played a guitar patch and then played that sound. So when I first learned that song, right, from the jump, I learned sounds, like how to pick the right sounds as a keyboard player. This is all a byproduct of learning that song. How to play arpeggios, how to make triads sound great. And I learned all of these things, how to play melodies, right? So that's how I learned at first. And once I was drawn in by the music and the community and environment. So the environment was the piano setup, right? My dad had a DX7, had a Hammond B3, right? My cousin had professional boards. My brother played bass. I had all of these people with me every single day at like 9, right? So the environment in the community was there. So that helped me. So once I started playing, I started like dibbling, dabbling with stuff, just placing my hands down, seeing what happened. And I remember when I did this, like as a kid, man, I just stumbled on an augmented chord. So I spent years trying to figure that chord out because I didn't know what I played. So I was like, I know I played 3 notes, but I was like, nope, that don't sound right. Uh, I was just trying to figure it out, and they were all wrong. And it wasn't until I got a teacher or grabbed some books, and then I started searching on YouTube, and I found out like, oh, that chord I played back when I was 9 was an augmented chord. And then I figured out how to play, and then I just playing augmented chords. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, that was kind of like the journey. It's like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, 20 steps forward, 40 steps back. It's kind of this pull and pull, push and pull kind of thing. All right. So here's what I did, right? When I finally did figure out chords, I figured out how to make triads, right? You know, by listening to music, learning songs, my cousins and them telling me what to play, things like that. So I learned a C major chord, and I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. I didn't really have any thoughts of it. It was like, okay, as a chord, it sounds cool. It's a chord, right? So my dad always told me like, hey, the lowest note in the chord was the name of the chord. So it was a C, but I found out later that that's not always true. But anyway, the lowest note in the chord was C. So I'm like, okay, he said, you can take the lowest note and put it at the bottom. Just play 1 note, just like that. And I'm like, cool, right? So once I start figuring this out, he didn't have to tell me what to do next, right? I just kind of just experimented. Like that was the key as a beginner, like just try things. So I was like, okay, let me just see what other notes I can play on my left hand and see if it sounds good. So I'm like, all right, let me play a D. And I was like, this sounds different. And to my early ears, I'm like, oh, doesn't really sound bad. Right. And I was like, okay, I noted that D, playing D over a C major chord was like, okay, that sounds cool. That can work. Then E, like, okay, that's cool. Then I'm like, what is this black note right here? I'm like, oh no, that sounds bad. So I was like, all right, yeah. Then I started making my own observations and things like that based on this. Meanwhile, I didn't realize that this was a byproduct. The byproduct of doing this, can't talk, is me developing my ear, right? I'm just figuring things out. I didn't know what these chords were called. I just kept trying things. So I'm like, oh, this sounds cool. All right. Then I was like, oh, that's really like dark. And in my beginning ears, this didn't sound good, even though it's a major 7. But because that minor 7 is right, minor second is right here. It was like rub, and my ears weren't developed, right? And as I got older, or more mature in music, I realized that dissonance is subjective. Like what sounds good and what doesn't sound good is really depends on your level or your journey in the musical phase. Like major sevens didn't sound good to me at first, but as I kept hearing them in the context of music, I was like, oh, okay, that sounds good, right? So these were little things that I was like learning, but I didn't realize that. Okay. But it really came down to me playing the piano, just spending time with the instrument. So that's a key tip right there. Just got to spend time with your instrument, right? Just experiment, do things that find that's interesting to you, you know? So, over time, I'm like, oh, okay. I wasn't worried about playing songs so much. I already had the song. I wore this song out, right? I wasn't trying to add no special chords to it because I didn't have anything to compare it to. So, you know, that song was just that song. It was something that was current on the radio and I was playing it at 9. So I was like, okay, all right, that's cool. So as I kept developing, learning things, I kept experimenting, and that's how I developed my vocabulary, right? So over time, I'm like, okay, this is different. This is different. And then I realized like, after I started moving these chords around, right? This same chord, C chord with the G in the bottom, doesn't really sound the same in this area of the keyboard, this register. The same chords sound different, right? So I'm like, oh, these are different colors. And I start making note of that. So I'm like, okay, depending on where I play, it's going to give it a certain sound. To me, like all the chords sounded real good around C2, C4, right? And this is also something that I was taking notes on. So I'm like, okay, maybe I should keep my chords around here. And then as I was growing, right, I'm like, okay, if I bring this C chord in root position, major chord, if I bring it up here, it's the same chord, but it sounds too high. I'm like, how can I keep this chord in the range or most of the notes under this C4, right? And then I heard of inversions. Oh, that sounds cool. Let me see what happens if I bring E down here. I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay, this is sound. I guess this is the same chord because it has the same notes, the same letters, but they're in a different order. But I remember my dad telling me the lowest note means the chord is different. So I'm like, this has to be an E chord, right? But it wasn't an E chord because when I did figure out how to play an E chord, it wasn't the same note. And that's how I kind of stumbled on inversion. So my point is, I know I'm all over the place. It's like a lot of the information that you're going to learn as a beginner is going to be a byproduct of you just spending time with your instrument. So if you want to take your playing to the next level, consider joining DB Music Academy. It's my online platform where I help musicians take their playing to the next level through content, community, and coaching. Right? I'm there with you every step of the way. I'm there to help you get to the place that you want to be in the shortest amount of time possible. It's still going to take work, but I'm there to help you. And I wish I had this when I was in my younger stage. My family was cool, but if I had someone, a master that would help me get to where I am, I would be so much farther along than I am now. So take advantage of this great opportunity, and hopefully I'll see you guys on the other side. The link is in the description. All right, peace.